The night was heavy with silence as Ethan said, "Why does it feel like my life ended that day?" He was 32, staring at the faint hospital glow outside his window. His body was broken, his legs bandaged, his heart heavier than the plaster cast. He remembered the crash, the screech of metal, the sound of glass shattering like screams. His sidekick and only friend, Daniel, age 30, had sat by him every night, trying to keep his spirit alive. Daniel said, "You are still here, Ethan, and that means something." But Ethan felt the weight of despair. In his mind, shadows whispered, "You'll never walk again. You've lost everything." Tears blurred his sight, and a small old letter from his father slipped from the drawer. He had never read it, afraid of what truth it might hold. Ethan whispered, "Was he right about me? That I would never find my strength?" The silence broke when Daniel gripped his hand. "You'll find a way," Daniel said. The room seemed darker, but within Ethan, a spark struggled to stay alive. The morning light broke through the blinds, sharp and unforgiving. Ethan whispered, "Another day in this cage." His body refused to move, legs lifeless beneath the sheets. Daniel arrived with 2 coffees, forcing a smile. "It's a step, Ethan. One day at a time." Ethan turned away, bitter. The silence pressed in, heavy as the plaster on his body. The world outside kept moving, but here, time had stopped. Ethan's doctor, Dr. Morgan, entered with charts. Dr. Morgan said, "Recovery will not be easy, but it is possible." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Possible? You mean a dream?" Daniel intervened softly. "Listen, Ethan." The doctor, age 55, leaned in. "Your body can heal. The question is whether your spirit will allow it." Ethan turned his face away, ashamed at the truth. That night, Ethan stared at the unopened letter again. He whispered, "Why did he leave me this?" His father's shadow loomed in memory, a man of harsh words and silence. Daniel leaned closer. "Maybe it's time you read it." Ethan shook his head, voice cracking. "Not yet. I don't have the strength." The clock ticked loudly, mocking his hesitation. The storm outside raged as Ethan finally shouted, "Why me? Why this?" His voice echoed against sterile walls. Daniel didn't answer. He only placed his hand again on Ethan's. In the silence after, Ethan felt his father's letter burning a hole in his chest. He whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." For the first time, the idea of tomorrow felt less like a curse and more like a chance. Morning washed the room in thin gold, as machines hummed like distant bees. Ethan said, "I do not know who I am without motion." Daniel set a coffee down and steadied his breath. Daniel said, "You are more than your legs." The door opened with a gentle knock that felt like a promise. A physical therapist stepped in carrying a clipboard and calm eyes. Maya said, "I am here to teach the body how to listen again." Ethan stared at the letter on the tray and looked away fast. Ethan said, "Listening hurts more than silence." Maya rolled a stool to his side and waited. Maya said, "Pain is a teacher, not a verdict." The clock ticked as if testing his resolve. Daniel said, "We start small and we keep going." Ethan closed his eyes to hide the tremor in his voice. Ethan said, "If I fall, remind me I tried." Maya met his gaze with a patient nod. Maya said, "Trying is the first step that counts." Maya wheeled in a set of braces that looked like silver questions. "How?" Ethan said, "Those belong to someone braver." Maya clipped the brace to the bed rail with quiet hands. Maya said, "Bravery is a habit, not a feeling." Daniel moved the chair closer until their shoulders nearly touched. Daniel said, "I am here for the habit part." The air smelled of antiseptic and new hopes. Maya said, "We will start with breath, then posture." Ethan drew a thin breath and felt it snag on fear. Ethan said, "My ribs remember the crash." Maya counted the inhale like a metronome, guiding a shaky song. Maya said, "Follow the count and let the fear pass through." The tremor in his hands eased a fraction as the room slowed. Ethan said, "I can hold this for one more second." Daniel nodded and watched the second become 2. The first lift felt like a storm moving under his skin. Ethan said, "Do not let me drown in this moment." Maya braced his shoulder with steady pressure. Maya said, "I will hold the shore while you find your balance." Daniel crouched near the foot of the bed with eyes fixed and bright. Daniel said, "I have you if you sway." Ethan gritted his teeth as weight returned like a forgotten debt. Ethan said, "My legs are strangers demanding rent." Maya guided his hips into alignment with small precise cues. Maya said, "Stack bones, soften jaw, breathe into the back." Sweat beaded along his hairline and fell like tiny prayers. Ethan said, "I am shaking but not breaking." The room cheered in a hush, only they could hear. Maya said, "That is standing even if it is brief." Later, the effort drained from him like light at dusk. Ethan said, "I stood, and the world did not end." Daniel pressed a cold bottle to his palm and smiled small. Daniel said, "The world began a little." Maya logged notes with neat strokes that sounded like progress. Maya said, "We will build on today and pace the winds." Ethan glanced at the letter and felt the old ache stir. Ethan said, he would have mocked this tiny victory. Daniel lifted his chin until their eyes met. Daniel said, "Let your voice be louder than his ghost." The rain had stopped and left the window shining. Maya said, "Your story belongs to you now." Ethan let the bottle rest against his cheek like a medal. Ethan said, "I want tomorrow to find me trying again." Evening crept in with long blue shadows and a hush that felt kind. Ethan said, "Tell me how to keep this spark alive." Maya folded the brace straps with ritual care. Maya said, "Name what helped and repeat it tomorrow." Daniel checked the schedule on his phone and nodded. Daniel said, "I will set alarms for breath and posture." The letter lay near the lamp like a door without a handle. Ethan said, "When I can stand unassisted, I will open it." Maya paused as if honoring a contract. Maya said, "Let the promise anchor the work, not weigh it down." The city lights blinked awake beyond the glass. Daniel said, "I want to hear you read it when you are ready." Ethan exhaled until the fear loosened its grip. Ethan said, "Tonight, I will sleep beside hope." The morning began with a sharp chill in the therapy hall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like restless thoughts. Ethan gripped the parallel bars as sweat dripped from his temple. Ethan said, "My body feels like stone dragging me down." Maya stood firm, guiding his alignment with patient eyes. Maya said, "Your breath carves the stone until it shapes a path." Daniel watched closely, jaw tight with worry. Daniel said, "Do not let the weight convince you. It is impossible." Ethan shook, as if the ground might split beneath him. Ethan said, "Every step feels like a betrayal." Maya steadied his arm and whispered, "It is not betrayal, it is memory waking." Ethan clenched his teeth, forcing one trembling step forward. The sound echoed like thunder in his mind. Ethan said, "I do not know if I can take another." Daniel pressed his palm against Ethan's back and said, "Then let one be enough for today." The second attempt brought Ethan to his knees, pain flashing through his face like lightning. Ethan said, "This is proof I am broken." Daniel knelt quickly, steadying his shoulders. Daniel said, "Broken things can still carry light." Maya crouched with calm precision, voice firm but kind. Maya said, "Pain is not proof of weakness, it is proof of effort." Ethan's breath hitched, shame gripping tighter than pain. Ethan said, "You both talk as if this matters." Daniel locked eyes with him and said, "It matters because you are not done yet." Silence grew, broken only by Ethan's shaky inhale. Ethan said, "Then why do I feel like a failure already?" Maya replied, "Because growth begins where comfort ends." By afternoon, Ethan refused the exercise bench, arms folded tight. Ethan said, "Do not make me a spectacle of failure again." Daniel paced nearby, frustration sharpening his voice. Daniel said, "You think this is about pride? It is about living again." Ethan's glare was bitter, his voice cracked with anger. Ethan said, "Living? This is humiliation." Maya spoke softly yet firmly, grounding the storm. Maya said humiliation is the mask of fear. Ethan turned his face to the window, eyes glossed with shame. Ethan said, "Fear feels safer than falling again." Daniel leaned closer, voice low with urgency. Daniel said, "If you give up now, you choose the crash to define you forever." The room vibrated with silence until Ethan muttered, "I hate you both for believing I can do this." Maya smiled faintly and said, "Then let hate walk with you until hope arrives." That night, shadows grew thick around the hospital bed as Ethan wrestled with whispers inside his mind. The voice of doubt hissed, "You are nothing without legs." Ethan pressed his hands to his ears, but it echoed deeper. Ethan said, "Why do you never leave me?" Daniel stirred awake in the chair nearby, blinking. Daniel said, "Who are you talking to?" Ethan turned away, ashamed. Ethan said, "Just myself, the part of me that hates me most." Daniel leaned forward with fierce gentleness. Daniel said, "Then let me hate it for you." Silence pressed heavy until Ethan whispered, "I do not know if I can face it again tomorrow." Daniel answered, "You will, because I will drag you if I have to." A faint, broken laugh slipped from Ethan's lips, the first since the crash. Rain returned with the morning as Ethan faced the mirror in the rehab room. Ethan said, "Who is this stranger with hollow eyes?" Maya adjusted the braces on his legs with deliberate care. Maya said, "It is a man who still stands despite storms." Ethan's reflection wavered in the glass, fractured by streaks of water outside. Daniel appeared behind him in the mirror, smiling faintly. Daniel said, "I see the man who dragged himself through fire." Ethan exhaled sharply, clutching the bars. Ethan said, "I do not believe in him yet." Maya met his reflection's eyes and said, "Then let us borrow your disbelief until you find faith." The sound of rain softened, leaving only the hum of machines and Ethan's breath filling the silence with fragile resolve. The evening storm rattled the glass as Ethan finally opened the letter. His hands shook like branches in wind. Ethan whispered, "I have avoided this voice for years." Daniel leaned forward, eyes fixed on the folded paper. Daniel said, "Read it aloud, Ethan." Ethan's chest rose in shallow waves as words blurred on the page. The handwriting was heavy, full of weight. Ethan read, "Son, I left because I was drowning in my own failures." Tears spilled before he reached the next line. Ethan said, "He was weak, and I hated him for it." Daniel placed his hand on the bedrail, firm and steady. Daniel said, "He was human, like you." Ethan's lips trembled as he read further. Ethan said, "But he wrote, 'You will fall, but you will walk again.'" The words broke something open inside him, the shadow loosening its grip. Ethan said, "He believed in me when I never did." Silence followed, filled only by thunder and breath. Later, Ethan stared at the ceiling, clutching the letter to his chest. Ethan said, "He abandoned me but still left me hope." Maya entered quietly, sensing the change in the air. Maya said, "Sometimes a wound is also a seed." Ethan shook his head, conflicted. Ethan said, "How do I forgive someone who let me break?" Maya placed her hand over the letter gently. Maya said, "Forgiveness is not for him, it is for you." Daniel added softly, "You cannot walk forward chained to yesterday." Ethan closed his eyes, inhaling as if the words could anchor him. Ethan said, "I want to hate less and try more." Maya's voice lowered, steady and calm. Maya said, "Then every step becomes an act of release." The silence afterward was lighter than before. The next morning, Ethan returned to the therapy bars with the letter tucked into his pocket. Ethan said, "If he thought I could walk again, then I must try." Daniel smiled faintly, the first genuine smile in weeks. Daniel said, "Then today we make his words true." Maya adjusted the braces with practiced care. Maya said, "Do not walk for him, walk for yourself." Ethan's legs quivered as he stood, holding the bars with white knuckles. Ethan said, "This feels like carrying two worlds." Maya whispered, "Then set one down and take just one step." His foot moved forward, shaky but real. Ethan whispered, "I am walking with him and without him." Daniel clapped softly, as if afraid sound might shatter the moment. For the first time, Ethan's eyes carried a trace of light. By afternoon, exhaustion claimed Ethan, yet he refused to stop. Ethan said, "My body screams, but my soul is louder." Daniel fetched water, shaking his head with awe. Daniel said, "You are stubborn, and it is beautiful." Maya watched his posture falter. Maya said, "Rest is not failure, it is fuel." Ethan collapsed back into the chair, clutching his knees. Ethan said, "I walked because he believed in me, but I will walk again because I finally do." The words surprised even him, leaving him breathless. Daniel knelt, eyes damp with pride. Daniel said, "That is the man I knew was in there." The room filled with silence, not heavy now, but sacred. That night, Ethan stood at the window with Daniel and Maya nearby. Rain had cleared, leaving stars bright against the sky. Ethan whispered, "For years I thought my father's shadow would consume me." Daniel rested his hand on his shoulder. Daniel said, "Now you cast your own shadow, Ethan." Maya folded her arms gently, voice steady. Maya said, "The truth is not chains, it is light breaking through cracks." Ethan pressed the letter to the glass, looking out. Ethan said, "He gave me hope without knowing I would ever read it." Daniel smiled softly, his voice warm. Daniel said, "And now you give it life by walking forward." Silence carried them into the night, stars shining as if in agreement. The rehab hall was silent, except for Ethan's ragged breath. Sweat traced lines down his face as he gripped the bars. Ethan said, "This is the fight of my life." Daniel stood behind him, his voice steady as stone. Daniel said, "You are stronger than the crash, stronger than the pain." Maya crouched to his side, guiding his braces. Maya said, "This moment will shape you. Stand inside it." Ethan's knees shook violently, but his eyes burned with fire. Ethan said, "I will not give this victory away." The floor felt like quicksand, yet he dragged one foot forward, then another. Daniel clapped once, the sound like thunder in the empty hall. Maya whispered, "That is not survival, that is defiance." Ethan gritted his teeth and shouted, "I choose to rise." Each step was agony, yet Ethan pressed forward. Ethan said, "The shadow wants me to stop, but I refuse." Daniel moved closer, jaw set, eyes wet. Daniel said, "You are not walking alone." Maya adjusted her hand on his shoulder, her voice clear. Maya said, "Every step is a rebellion against despair." Ethan's teeth chattered as muscles screamed for release. Ethan said, "Then let rebellion be my anthem." He dragged another step, and the hall echoed like a drumbeat of triumph. Daniel whispered through clenched teeth, "That's it, brother." Ethan's chest heaved with fire, but his eyes locked on the end of the bars. Ethan said, "I will reach the end today." Halfway down the bars, Ethan collapsed into the chair waiting behind him, chest heaving. Ethan said, "I failed again." Daniel dropped to his knees, grabbing his arms. Daniel said, "You failed forward. That's progress." Maya leaned in with firm eyes. Maya said, "The body bends before it learns to carry." Ethan pressed his face into his palms, sobbing. Ethan said, "I do not deserve this strength." Daniel's grip tightened, his voice breaking. Daniel said, "Then let us deserve it together." Maya's calm presence grounded the storm. Maya said, "What matters is not the fall but the rise afterward." Ethan exhaled, lifting his head with raw eyes. Ethan said, "Then I will rise again until standing feels like breathing." Later that evening, Ethan stood again, this time without the bars, Daniel and Maya holding either side. Ethan whispered, "If I fall, catch me." Daniel smiled faintly, voice steady. Daniel said, "We will not let you break." Maya leaned in closer, voice strong. Maya said, but you must believe the ground will hold you. Ethan's legs trembled, but his arms stretched outward like wings. Ethan said, I am walking without chains. He took a small staggering step forward, both supporters steadying him. Daniel whispered, That's it. That's freedom. Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile through his tears. Ethan said, This is my proof. I am alive. As night fell, Ethan sat by the window, legs aching but spirit alight. Ethan said, Today, I fought death's memory. And lived. Daniel pulled up a chair, pride glowing through his exhaustion. Daniel said, You walked through hell and made it holy. Maya closed her notes, eyes reflecting quiet triumph. Maya said, You have tasted your own strength. Ethan held the letter in his lap, eyes wet but steady. Ethan said, Father, I forgive you. And I forgive myself. Daniel leaned in with a smile that reached his eyes. Daniel said, This is only the beginning. Ethan's voice was softer, but it carried weight. Ethan said, Then let tomorrow find me stronger than today. The morning sun spilled across the rehab hall like forgiveness, softer than yesterday's fire. Ethan steadied himself on the parallel bars, his legs weak but willing. Ethan said, Today I do not fight. Today I accept. Daniel clapped his shoulder lightly, smile relaxed. Daniel said, Acceptance is harder than victory. Maya checked the brace straps, nodding with approval. Maya said, You are learning balance between effort and peace. Ethan drew a deep breath, his voice calm. Ethan said, I used to fear silence, but now it holds me. Daniel leaned closer, eyes shining. Daniel said, Silence means you are listening to yourself again. Ethan smiled faintly, sweat on his brow. Ethan said, Then, maybe healing was never about walking. It was about learning who I am. Later, Ethan sat by the garden courtyard, wheels beneath his chair crunching gravel. Birds sang above, careless of his struggle. Ethan whispered, I thought my world ended in that crash, but it only shifted. Daniel sat beside him, sipping coffee. Daniel said, Shifts are not endings, they are doorways. Maya leaned against the railing, watching quietly. Maya said, The body remembers pain, but the soul remembers growth. Ethan tilted his face to the sun, warmth soaking his skin. Ethan said, I no longer hate what happened. I hate only what I refuse to learn. Silence stretched in peace instead of despair. As the day faded, Ethan returned to his room and found the letter folded neatly on his bedside. Ethan said, I feared these words, but now they feel like wings. Daniel leaned in the doorway, voice warm. Daniel said, Because you gave them meaning. Maya entered softly, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Maya said, Your father's failure does not define you, your response does. Ethan's throat tightened, tears rising again. Ethan said, Then I am no longer his shadow. I am my own light. Daniel crossed the room, resting his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Daniel said, That light will carry you farther than legs ever could. Ethan smiled, broken yet whole. That night, Ethan dreamed not of the crash but of walking through fields untouched by pain. When he woke, his heart was lighter. Ethan said, For the first time, I am not afraid of tomorrow. Daniel stirred from the chair, rubbing his eyes. Daniel said, Then tomorrow already belongs to you. Maya entered with morning charts, her face carrying quiet pride. Maya said, Courage has become your rhythm. Ethan pressed the letter beneath his pillow gently. Ethan said, Then let courage guide the rest of my days. The room felt less like a cage, more like a beginning. By morning rounds, Ethan stood in the hallway, both hands on his walker, Daniel and Maya watching. Nurses slowed their steps, eyes widening. Ethan said, I am not perfect, but I am alive. Daniel's grin spread wide, voice breaking. Daniel said, Alive and unstoppable. Maya clasped her hands, her tone calm yet celebratory. Maya said, This is not the end, but a chapter closing. Ethan lifted his head high, scars visible, spirit blazing. Ethan said, I am not walking toward healing. I am walking as healing itself. The hallway erupted in quiet applause from onlookers. For the first time, Ethan stood taller than his fear. The morning air was crisp as Ethan moved slowly into the courtyard, Walker steady beneath his hands. Ethan said, the sky looks wider today. Daniel walked at his side, smiling softly. Daniel said, that is because you are finally looking up. Maya followed with calm eyes, arms folded gently. Maya said, healing changes the way we see the world. Ethan's breath steamed in the cold, but his spirit was warm. Ethan said, for the first time, I feel more alive than broken. Birds scattered from the trees as if echoing his release. Daniel placed his hand briefly on Ethan's back. Daniel said, then let today be remembered. They stopped beneath the oak tree, its branches stretching like arms of memory. Ethan whispered, this tree saw me broken, and now it sees me rising. Daniel's voice cracked with pride. Daniel said, I will never forget this view. Maya stepped closer, her tone steady. Maya said, moments like these are anchors. Hold them when the storm returns. Ethan brushed his hand against the bark, rough but grounding. Ethan said, I am not walking toward who I was, but toward who I choose to be. The air smelled of wet earth, as if nature itself bore witness. As they lingered, Ethan turned to Daniel with glistening eyes. Ethan said, you carried me when I refused to move. Daniel shook his head, voice trembling. Daniel said, you carried yourself. I only reminded you. Maya added quietly, support is not chains, it is a bridge. Ethan placed a hand briefly on Daniel's arm. Ethan said, then you were my bridge when I was drowning. Daniel smiled, finally allowing tears to fall. Daniel said, and you are my proof that brokenness is not the end. The three stood in shared silence, the world slowing around them. Later, Ethan sat by the window in his room, looking out at the horizon. The letter lay folded neatly on the table. Ethan said, Father, I carried your silence too long. Daniel leaned on the windowsill, voice quiet. Daniel said, now you carry his hope instead. Maya closed her notes, watching with a rare softness. Maya said, closure is not forgetting, it is choosing peace. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes bright with clarity. Ethan said, then I forgive him. And I forgive myself. The room filled with stillness that no longer hurt. Night descended with quiet grace, as Ethan stood once more at the window, Walker beside him but hands free. Stars shimmered in endless sky. Ethan whispered, I thought my journey was about walking again, but it was about learning to love myself. Daniel placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder, smiling through tears. Daniel said, you found the step that matters most. Maya's voice was soft, final. Maya said, the step inward. Ethan closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek, and whispered, I am home, at last. The stars gleamed brighter, as though they too understood.